What's up, gamers? It's your boy, JKon. With champions wrapped up and the off-season upon us, I thought it'd be fun to reflect on the first year of VCT by describing every team season in 3 words or less. Let's get into it. We'll start out first with my home region, Americas. 100 Thieves. 100 disappointments. After Coach Shongare's left, this team looked a lot less disciplined and really disappointed compared to their previous showings with the same roster. They barely edged out wins against teams that on paper should have been weaker than them, and they all seemed to underperform in-game. Cloud9. Rookies take over. Everyone thought that C9 were trolling with dropping Ye and Vanity, but MCE was cooking with his rookie pickups as they performed extremely well, being the second best team in the regular season and being a pistol round away from heading to Tokyo and champs. Unfortunately, they did not progress in LCQ and they were eliminated by Leviatán. Evil Geniuses, 0 to hero. From being rated as the worst team in Americas to making a controversial roster change, getting a shot at playoffs because of MIBR, becoming villains of the scene on Japanese soil, to taking the world championship and bringing home a trophy to North America, completing their Cinderella run. What more can you ask for? Furia! Just mid. Middle of the pack team, they beat those below them and they lost to those above them. They had some moments, but they really overheated a lot of the time. They were just the middle BR team. KRÜ Esports, best winless team. This team was 0-10 in the year coming into LCQ, but they were a lot better than teams that were higher up on the standings than them. They unfortunately played a ton of close maps and couldn't close them out, but they were able to return to the champion stage once more, winning LCQ. Rest in peace, Davies. You will be missed. Leviatán. Couldn't adapt enough. Leviatán looked extremely drilled in their protocols all year, but the big problem with them was that they couldn't change or adapt that style, and they were figured out pretty heavily by halfway through the season. Also, it seemed like a few of their members on their roster were homesick, and they just couldn't perform their best on stage. Loud. Viper Harbor Innovators. Loud set the meta all year, dominating Americas with their Viper Harbor innovation. They brought that agent duo across their entire map pool and forced everybody else to adapt. Viper Harbor won 80% of the maps played in playoffs at Champions this year. MIBR. You're welcome, EG. MIBR was Brazil's weakest roster, and outside of a surprise win on NRG in week 3, their only big accomplishment in the year was getting a knife kill on 100 Thieves that set in motion EG's meteoric rise. Pretty bottom tier roster, unfortunately. NRG. Optic was better. NRG came into the year with the Optic core of Finesse, Victor, Crashies, and Chet, adding Som and Artist to the mix. They started out slow, and although they did make semifinals at both Lock-In and Tokyo, they got absolutely embarrassed at Champions and were unable to replicate the core success from the previous year. Sentinels. Extreme roster instability. Sentinels decided to rebuild around 10s, adding world champions in Sasi and Pancata, as well as X-Set, Zekin, Def, Coach Psycho, and Analyst Drew Spark. They had to find a new 6th man as Sick was moved to an inactive position, so they brought in Marv. Psycho left the organization, and Tens was benched for Marv for a bit. Tens was brought back as Def was dropped from the org with 2 weeks left in the regular season. They didn't have enough time to gel or build chemistry at all with the chaos, especially with their role swaps. Kind of a waste of a year for them. Going over to the Pacific League, we'll start out with Detonation Focus Me. New Shanghai Dragons? DFM went completely winless in their season, ending 0-12 across Lock-In to LCQ. They were the worst constructed roster in the franchise league and are headed straight to a rebuild. DRX. Hometown Dominance. DRX were experimenting with a 6-man roster this year, adding Foxy9, and although they were able to perform quite well during the regular season, their victory streak only extended to the region, as when they got to international tournaments, they're playoff contenders, but not title contenders just yet. Gen.G. King deserved better. Gen.G started out the season 4-0 and looked unstoppable, literally one of the best teams in Pacific. But then they hit a wall and they could not win until playoffs and LCQ arrived. They were able to end top 4 and top 3 respectively, but the roster just did not seem to click that well. Meteor underperformed, and I thought the lone bright spot was King, and I thought that he deserved better from his team. We'll get into roster mania when more stuff gets confirmed coming out soon. Global Esports. Goodbye, India. The GE roster was definitely an experiment that I was pretty interested in. They brought in all these duelists from different nationalities and had them cooking together Blue Lock style. They started out the year slow as they tried to iron out the roster, and although they started to look a lot better and more competitive by the end of the season, they could not close out their maps. SK Rossi, although the poster boy for India, unfortunately played very poorly throughout the year and was one of their worst rated players. So I'm interested in seeing where this roster goes and if they move away from the Indian identity. Paper Rex. A year to remember. Paper Rex started out the year really poorly, losing their opening matchup at lock-in against C9 and going 1-1 in their first 2 series before they benched Benkai and brought in something. The Russian superstar turned their team around, ending the season 7-2 and taking the Pacific Championship over DRX. They were able to make a miracle run at Tokyo with CGRS instead of something, making top 3, and at Champions with their full roster, they were able to make it to the grand finals. Unfortunately, we won't be seeing Jing on the roster anymore, but they definitely gave us a year to remember. RRQ. Elmimore, Sheriff, God. RRQ really surprised me as I wasn't very high on their roster as they tried for a combination of Indonesian and Filipino talent. They were able to beat the teams below them, but they struggled against stronger talent. They looked really good near the end of the year, closing out their season with 2 wins and 1 loss coming from Paper Rex and steamrolled GE and LCQ. Unfortunately, they played Zeta very close but lost. This roster has definitely improved a ton over the year, and Elmimore has to be in consideration for one of the best Sheriff players in the world, because he is absolutely insane with the pistol. T1, pretty solid year. I thought T1 had a pretty good year. They brought on this hybrid roster of English/Korean speaking Koreans, with Carpe recently transferring over to Valorant. They ended 3rd place in the regular season and were able to make it to both international tournaments. Unfortunately, they were grouped both times, but even so, being able to make it to both international tournaments is quite an accomplishment in itself. Talon Esports, Patifan, Flex, God. Talon brought the entire Xerxia crew sans Scary into the International League, with Patifan returning to the roster. Speaking of Patifan, he played 11 different agents during the 2023 season and was role swapping almost every matchup. If that doesn't tell you the chaos that was this team, then I don't know what does, but my man played anything and everything for this roster. Team Secret, Young Guns, good. Team Secret looked decent during the regular season, with Jesse Vash, their IGL, looking really good on his Sova, but on non-Sova maps, he seemed to struggle. Secret were definitely carried by their young guns who really improved over the season. I was impressed by both Jeremy and Envy as they brought the firepower for their team. Unfortunately, the 3 older members were not as consistent with their fragging and struggled. Secret made a run near the end of the year, beating DRX and GE 2-0, leading to playoffs and making it to the grand finals of LCQ, but they did fall to Zeta. They looked better as the year went forward, but I think it was truly off of the backs of the young guns. I'm excited to see their future. Zeta Division. Laz is goated. Zeta had an up and down year figuring out their roles in comps. They tried to switch IGLs around, handing the reins to Sugar Zero for a bit, but it eventually returned to Laz. Speaking of Laz, he was their best player all year, and even though he did improve as an IGL over the year, especially during their LCQ run as they made it to champions, I think Laz is just a player that should have been unleashed to frag and carry. His teammates were inconsistent throughout the year, and although Laz's chamber saved them during LCQ, it wasn't enough on the international stage as they had a very tough group. Laz will still be one of my favorite players to root for, and I hope they can retool their roster to support him better next year. And we head over to EMEA, starting out with BBL Esports. Not that bad. BBL were seen as the 2nd Turkish team in the region, and they definitely showed that. Although they did get blown out, on some maps, they actually played a lot of their matchups close and did show some flashes of greatness. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough as other teams just had stronger rosters. They weren't as bad as their record showed, but not enough to take wins. Fnatic, the two-time champ. Fnatic had an amazing comeback on map 5 of the grand finals of Lock-In to take their first trophy in Valorant. They went on to have a perfect regular season despite losing the EMEA championship to Liquid. They then went to dominate Tokyo, sweeping the entire tournament with only 1 map loss to EG, claiming their 2nd trophy of the year. Unfortunately, they couldn't keep the momentum going and bowed out in 4th place at Champions, but they still had an incredible year and are the first roster to win back-to-back international tournaments. FUT Esports. Unique playstyle. FUT were the best Turkish team in EMEA, and they really were able to show their own personal brand of playing Valorant. They love running solo initiator KO and are more than willing to run Brimstone on a lot of their maps, as they loved using their floor as lava comps. They really surprised me during the year and were a team that I definitely underestimated, but they should be proud of themselves for what they were able to display on the international stage. Giants. The consistent team. Giants were just the consistent team. They were consistently good against the teams below them and consistently bad against the teams better than them. Cloud was their foundation that kept them stable, and although they could be a very dangerous team, their consistency was not enough to take them deep. Na'Vi. Cooking too much. Na'Vi felt like they were experimenting a little too much. They were running so many random comps and changing roles that it looked like they couldn't find form or consistency. They have a tournament winning core and looked good when they had their players on their comfortable roles, but outside of that, their game plans were cooked to well done. Karmine Corp, Eggman's favorite team. If you're in the Valorant space, you know who Sideshow is. One of the greatest commentators in my opinion, and I've been following his career since Overwatch and TF2. He pretty much said it all for this team because they were trolling all season. Putting their eggs in the Scream IGL basket and playing no duelists all year was just a sight to see. They had terrible protocols and were the basis of a lot of great clips from Sideshow.
My favorite on Ascent was round 17 where XMS has an op. They don't even have Nuvera op in. They have XMS op in and he smokes himself off. He uses both smokes at the beginning of these rounds every time so he doesn't have them for the mid-rounding. He smokes himself off even though he's holding mid, and then Scream misses his molly over the top of Cat, and Redgar gets distracted by how badly it missed.
Koi, waste of talent. Koi had so many big names coming together on the roster, but they just couldn't get it together. I rate Shadows and Trex extremely highly as talents, and they were joining a roster with world champion Starzo, and at the time, highly rated IGL in Coldamenta with a young talent in Wolfen. Unfortunately, despite their talent, they just had really poor calls, and the latter two definitely struggled during the year. They were 2-7 in the regular season, and outside of a little noise in LCQ, this roster was just wasted. Team Heretics. Terrible roster construction. Heretics were one of the bottom feeder teams in EMEA, and if you look at their roster, it wouldn't be a surprise. They took the core of an old G2 that didn't work in the past of Mixwell, Avova, and Kellogg's. Then they added Boo as their IGL, but had him role swap, and Zeke, who unfortunately was not the same player as his championship MVP would tell you. They won 4 maps all year and had roster drama with Zeke, forcing them to use a coach stand-in until LCQ. This roster was just a complete mystery to me when it was first formed, and after the year, I still think that it's true. Team Liquid. Very inconsistent. TL looked absolutely horrendous at lock-in and were one of the worst teams that were at that tournament. They were able to pick it up during the regular season, and by the time the playoffs came, they were looking in form, being the only team to hand Fnatic a loss as they took the EMEA championship. They were able to go 5th-6 at Tokyo, where Safe hard carried them, but by the time champions rolled around, they were inconsistent yet again, going out of groups 0-2 with only Nats looking like a star player. They could look super good one day and look like the worst team at the tournament in the next. Team Vitality. Not great. Vitality put together a pretty good roster in my opinion, and I was pretty high on a few of their players. Unfortunately, like his fellow ex-Ascend members, Bone Cold was not able to find much success in the year. They only had 2 maps that they were good at, and the roster did not look like they were clicking together that successfully. One of their bright spots was Twistin, as I thought he had a pretty good year despite his team's failings. Rest in peace, King. You are always missed, and your legacy shall continue on. And that's the video. How would you describe each VCT team season in 3 words or less? I would love to hear what you guys have to say down below. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And until next time, stay hydrated. Peace.